So another, object in modern sense when people talk about the Illuminati, the whole idea of insidious influence to inform another, the Bilderberg Group. Now, what's interesting about the Bilderberg Group? One is it doesn't really have a name, does it? Because it's just named, Bilderberg is just the name of the hotel that they first met at in 1954. It's not the name of the group, which may not even really have one. But what if they met at a Ramada Inn? Would they then be the Ramada Inn Group?
The Bilderbergs are probably the most influential network of global elites that we have ever known. There is no other network or secret society that I know that has such an influence. And yet, the Bilderbergs are probably the most innocent of networks. In fact, technically, the Bilderbergs are nothing more than conference organizers, because the Bilderberg event, which is 2.5 days every year of invited elites, is the Bilderbergers. That's it. The question is, how do you get onto the list? And how are you invited? And what is the purpose? The original purpose was exemplary. 1954, the King of Holland, post-World War II, wanted to get the various members of society in the US and in Europe together so that we never have a war such as the one we just had. And this group met in the Bilderberg Hotel, which was outside of Amsterdam in the countryside. So there we had trade union leaders, we had military, we had intelligence, we had politicians, we had business people, we equally had journalists, TV pundits, you name it. And that was going fine until about the early 1980s. And there things began to change. The trade union people slowly were not invited to the point where they were kept out of Bilderberg meetings. And that probably was the case by about late 1980s, early 1990s. That was the time when I got to know the Bilderbergers. And it struck me that this was a most interesting organization, and I wanted to know what was their effect. Because in one sense, their effect was we had a happy audience of people who attended a 2.5-day conference and went away content and kept up relations with each other. So in one sense, the Bilderbergers were doing a great job. And that was because all these people got together, we were less likely to have wars. And that was one outcome of the Bilderbergers. However, the underlying outcome was that the Bilderbergers could create an agenda, a mindset, a way of operating, and make that totally legitimate. And what I did not realize in the early 1990s, and if we go as far back as that, was that the agenda was the agenda we're seeing being played out right now. The war with Russia, the war with Ukraine, why we're having this war, the tensions with China, and why Europe and America have tensions with China. And in fact, in academic terms, what we were seeing then was the start of a major tension on this world that we were always going to have. And that is between the West and the East, but more specifically, between the different types of capital, the way we use finance, the way we invest, the way we look after our people between the East and the West.
In human societies, you always have an elite. You have this social pyramid, and you have the haves at the top, the higher nobility, however you want to define them. You have have-somes below them, the kind of middle classes, the people who have a certain amount of wealth but want more, okay? They're the ones you can really motivate because they've got some, but they want more. Who has enough power? Who has enough wealth? Most people can't get enough of either one of those things, so they'll always take more. And then down at the bottom, you got the peasants that grow the food that keep everybody alive. People at the top don't even know how to grow food. They would die. They would wither like flowers, okay? Like the useless tulips that they are, they would all die if it wasn't for everyone else building the bridges and doing the rest before them. But that's, arguably, they might say that that's why the masses can't be given power, because then they wouldn't need you anymore. And that's actually an idea that's been proposed, is that the whole reason why you would have these elites that would obviously, throw out their trash and the beggars would go through it, was simply you could see someone living well and you could vicariously live that way.
If there's one party leaders want to be invited to, it's Bilderberg. That's where world leaders from politics to industry discuss. Well, we have no clue what they discuss because Bilderberg is an invite-only, ultra-secret conference where the press is not allowed, no minutes are released, and security is super tight.
So you go to a Bilderberg meeting. The meeting has 50 to 100 of the world's top elites. So they're ripe targets for any particular terrorist group. So the secrecy initially was to maintain security. That secrecy has now evolved, and that is now to maintain a particular perspective. It's true that many of the Bilderberg members feel they have the answer to our life. That is not quite true, because what they have is they have the answer to their continued wealth. So they don't want their wealth structures, and especially the ownership of their wealth, to change. So the discussions that are taking place are discussed behind the scenes. Mind you, are the Bilderbergers unusual in this? Not at all. We have in London an institution, a building known as Chatham House. And anybody who goes to Chatham House, they have to observe Chatham House rules. And those are, nothing is attributable to you, so please speak up, give us your mind, give us your view, because that will stay within these four walls. So from security to feeling confident that you can say anything you want and knowing that it won't be replicated, to also knowing that the agendas that slowly the Bilderbergs are unfolding will not become public.
It's a think tank, basically, which is an adjunct to NATO. Really, that's it, because it's an advisory group. So what do? We get important people. We bring them here for an annual meeting, maybe 100 or so, and they're in politics or in government or finance or media, those things that really matter. No farmers, no working men, no ordinary people who can influence others. And we just talk and we come up with policies, and then we just offer advice. So we're not doing anything. Nothing's going on. We don't have a name, and we just talk about stuff and make suggestions. Why are you doing this? It's not secret that they exist, but it's secret in terms of what it is that why. Why is it necessary that, because you can't speak freely if you think you're then going, there's a certain point to that. If you were constantly pilloried, you might say something that, get you canceled. So it's in a situation of security where you can say whatever you want, any way you want to say it, and you'll never be publicly accountable. It's also sneaky.
This is the first occasion for me, as I've never previously answered a question in the House of Commons on behalf of a private organisation for which the government has no responsibility. I have actually been a member of the steering committee of Bilderberg for many years now, I think about 10 years, and by chance actually this is my last year because we have a rule against being on the committee for too long, so I'm on the point. The Bilderberg organisation exists for the purpose of holding meetings once a year in various countries. It exists for no other purpose, and this year the meeting was held at a large hotel near Watford in Hertfordshire.
The games the Bilderbergs play from the members' point of view is not a game. It's very serious. It is actually looking at Western investment and its success right across the world. And in many ways, the Bilderbergs don't have this as a direct ambition, but they certainly tally with the British and the Americans, which is transactional capital must rule the world. The Federal Reserve Bank must be the number one institution in the world. The Federal Reserve Bank will determine what will be the new global currency, in other words, the new form of dollar, because that will eventually come to being the World Council or the world government. And both these two phenomena, world currency and world government, are not very far away. World currency probably 7 to 8 years, if that.
People talk about the Illuminati today, and when they look at things like the World Economic Forum, when they look at Karl Marx and his whole Communist Manifesto, when they look at other movements, they argue, isn't this just sort of, aren't they all kind of selling the same thing? We're going to make you happy and free, but first we have to, tweak things a little bit. So is all of this just, is it the same thing popping up over and over again? I mean, do people just continually just sort of, is the same idea century after century, different place, reinvented in some form? Or is there an inheritance among them?
For my background, one part of my family came from Asia Minor, from Turkey, when it was part of Greece, and it was a very rich part of the family, and they lost everything. The other part of my family came from Georgia, and my grandfather was the president of Georgia. He was Stalin's friend. He was head of the Caucasian desk, so there were a number of countries under the Caucasian umbrella, and he was head of them. But then him and Stalin fell out, and the whole family had to flee, were in fact being chased by Stalin's agents to be assassinated. Now, when you've experienced that, and you experience no money, you experience using every skill you've got to try and get whatever food and scrappings that you can, your view on life and how to engage changes. And once the top loses that touch of what it means to be not in a privileged position, of what it means not to have money, not to know what your future is, what trust can you have of people who display their wealth, and it's an excessive amount of wealth? The answer is very little. So the Bilderbergers initially made an error and never tried to reconcile that error. Instead, they pursued with the elites one particular direction, which to ensure that one form of global capital survived against the other form of global capital. What other societies could compare with the Bilderbergers? In one sense, no other society, because no other society has such a transactional global influence that people, you can guarantee what their response would be, whether they're resident in Turkey or San Francisco. The Masons have been quoted as being an influential secret society. They are. And they too had honorable beginnings. The Masons were people who were building walls, they were building houses, they were building projects, they were builders, they were masons. And the reason for their society was to preserve their skills if those skills came under attack. But then the membership opened, and now we have Masons who are from business, who are from police, who are judges, who are lawyers, who are government. And in a sense, what do the Masons do? They are a secret society. Their conversations are behind the scenes, and they are much more to do with local matters.
During my time as a Mason, again, they treated me really well. I joined many lodges, but the fact that you're in multiple degrees, guess what? All those degrees have weekly play practice. So you're out 3 or 4 nights a week practicing the ritual. Doesn't leave much time for life. I was working a huge £10 million plus deal in business for my company. And I remember sitting in the parking lot trying to negotiate the final outcome before going in and performing the ritual. And I lost the deal. I would ultimately win it for the first time ever. Totally botched my lines. These are good guys. There's not much depth to their interest besides getting together and having a joyous meal. I've learned their rituals as much as I care to, and I appreciate that, but I have some other demands on my time, so I'm just going to say goodbye for now. They accepted my resignation, and it was all very, very amiable.
So the Bilderbergers faced a challenge. How do you make a system that has fundamentally been predominating for the last 100 years go into the rest of this century and the next century, and the next century will be space? Who controls this earth in terms of financing controls space? How do you do that when in fact major parts of the world, Africa, South America, Asia, do not recognize transactional capital as a legitimate way forward. So the Bilderbergers now have to try and recruit, and I think recruit is the right word, individuals to the conferences who will take this message forward in their daily jobs, and if you like, have informal, even formal meetings in their own countries with people between countries, so that the view that transactional capital is the best way forward for this world predominates. The Bilderberg recruitment process is very interesting. On paper, it's a network. On paper, it's a conference organization. In one sense, the recruitment process is quite ordinary. Yes, you're watched, people observe you, you're a person of interest, and the real reason is you're a person of influence in your own sector, in your own society, and you're the sort of person that would take on the Bilderberg principles and spread them in your society. You can't apply, you're often referenced, so somebody champions you, and then your name is put forward to the selection committee. The chair of the selection committee at the Bilderbergs is the critical position. So on the selection committee, you look at two things. Number one, you look at achievement. What has this person done? Number two, you look at pedigree. Does this person hold credibility? Do they have status? Are they influential? And from those two elements, you assume influenceability. All the Europeans who are in post right now, Macron, Ursula von der Leyen, Olaf Scholz, they've all been to Bilderberg meetings. You probably find a lot of their government officials have been to Bilderberg meetings. The ones that they have a very good relationship in business are Bilderberg members, and probably the ones they have a good relationship with in the media are Bilderberg members. And there was one Russian back in time. And then in 2010, when it became clear that the Brzezinski philosophy of who's going to control the world through controlling resources had become American and British foreign policy, never declared so, but when that was clear, the Bilderbergs looked to Russia. And the very first oligarch they invited in 2010 was a man, Alexei Mordashov, and he was the chief executive and 80% plus shareholder of the steel company Severstal in Russia. When I was working with them, it was very interesting to see how the American management absolutely adored Mordashov. He gave them chances they never had before. He gave them opportunities they never had before. Mordashov was tough. He was performance-oriented, and if you didn't do your job, you lost your job. But there were no redundancies. Severstal North America became the name for United Steel, in fact known as SNA. And SNA reached such qualities that both Ford and General Motors for about a year only purchased their steel from SNA. So you can see from the Bilderberg point of view why Mordashov was such an attractive catch. But they were still worried about the reaction of members to a Russian being formally invited to the Bilderberg meeting. So Mordashov, his name was placed under the Swedish delegation. There was technically no Russian at the meeting. That could have worked. And we saw it work for 5 years when Putin was no longer president and we had the stand-in president, Dmitry Medvedev, who was there for 5 years, and he probably thought he could win a second term of office. No chance. But Medvedev did two things. He cleaned up tax, probably a corrupt function in the state of Russia, and to clean up tax was a remarkable achievement. He also cleaned up education. I remember some of the oligarchs running around their offices because the tax officer was calling or the tax inspector was going to come round. Something that Russia had never seen before. You could normally pay off the tax people, not anymore. So there was considerable room for improvement and considerable margin for negotiation in Russia if only the British and Americans had taken that opportunity. Imagine yourself as a middle manager in a company, in a government department, in a charity. What do you need to know? Well, you need to know about teamwork, about leadership, about a number of the ways we interact, the way we take control and make things happen. But then you get to the very top. Your chairman, your CEO, your minister. All these other subjects go into nothing. The number one subject is the psychology of the relationships that you have to handle almost on a daily basis. You may have the right strategy, the right view of the future, the right investment approach, but the psychology of the manner in which you influence the board and influence the C-suite or influence the minister, him or herself, is so poor that you have no credibility. Most of them feel themselves to be giving their own time. They're not being paid. There is no remuneration. They're giving their own efforts to build a society that they think is comparable with the best society can do in the world. But what is not considered is what is that right thing. It's almost an assumption. What they're there to do is to try and improve life. Many of the Bilderbergers we spoke to never saw themselves as influencing negatively. They saw themselves as contributors, positive contributors to the development of our communities. It was the more aware ones that finally recognized that in fact what they were doing was making a particular philosophy legitimate. And even they could not quite see when the time would come when the question of legitimacy would be, in a sense, not accepted so easily. The very aware ones were beginning to see it at the time of Yeltsin, for example, that Putin coming along was a different kettle of fish. Yes, he was transactional capital, but he was not going to be someone who would just roll over and allow the resources of Russia to be used in whatever way a third party wanted to. So I remember one or two conversations where the question was raised, will our influence still prevail 20 years from now? Well, that's happening now. There is a major questioning. And the questioning is for two reasons. One, we shouldn't be at war with Russia. We should not have created a situation in the Ukraine where the war was going to be inevitable. And secondly, right on our doorstep is an alternative philosophy that could really upset our financial institutions and destroy our financial structures and ownership patterns, and we are still pursuing a war with Russia. So what you've got here is a very interesting critical point. Will the legitimacy of the Bilderbergers, which has been assumed and really not questioned until recently, will that survive? And the question is, it won't because of the Bilderbergers themselves. It will only survive because of one particular influence coming out of the United States. And even that influence may not help the Bilderbergers and Europe survive as they are.
The most important thing about the Bilderberger to me is the guy who's really, as far as I'm concerned, is the architect of the whole thing. And that's Joseph Rettinger. He has a very interesting career, and he is really the moving force behind the Bilderberg Group. Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands is a front man. That's all he ever was. I mean, and a front man who apparently, he was a Nazi for a while, but then he wasn't a Nazi. And the impression I get with Bernhard was that he was whatever it was that seemed to be fashionable at the time. He didn't really care one way or the other. The guy who's the architect of it is Rettinger, whose nickname was, by the way, the Eminence Grise, the Gray Eminence. Never wanted to hold public office because he argued you never want to become a politician because you're in the public eye. You want to influence politicians. Rettinger is interesting because I'd run across him before, and his story goes all the way back to World War I. He's involved with the Polish Socialist Party. He's sometimes described as a Marxist, sometimes not. He's involved in some sort of unsuccessful peace negotiations in World War I that then somehow manages to get him kicked out of both England and France. And then He goes to Mexico, where he becomes, for years, he's an advisor to governments there against sort of left-wing labor movements. He illegally enters the U.S. in 1921, is arrested and then deported to Mexico again. The FBI sort of kept her, but they didn't know what to make out of him. One of the descriptions of him was that he was an international political activist. What's he acting on? What are his politics? Why do you have a Pole who may or not be a Marxist advising Mexican governments on labor policy, and then years later becoming the general secretary and the chief architect of the Bilderberg Group, the group that just offers advice and has no name?
The reason I'm interested in the Bilderbergers and government is partly my background. My grandfather was a politician, but my grandfather was one of the very few of the original Kremlin that were not killed. They were not assassinated or executed by Stalin. He survived. I do recall one story from my grandfather. Him and Stalin had a particularly nasty argument, and Stalin exiled my grandfather to Moscow. And the punishment was my grandfather had to go to the Bolshoi ballet every night. And when there wasn't a Bolshoi ballet, there was an opera. So my grandfather got sick and tired of ballet, opera, anything to do with classical music. He hated it. But he actually towed the line with Stalin for a while. And then came the big bust-up. The big bust-up was he was sent to Germany to export manganese to Europe. So he was chief executive of that particular company. And he denounced Stalin. And on that denunciation, the whole of the Kakabadze family for 3 generations were under death sentence, including myself. And I was under death sentence when I went to the Soviet Union because I was invited to start the very first business school in the Soviet Union in Georgia, in Tbilisi, the Tbilisi School of Economics. My father said to me, "Don't go, the law is still in practice." And I said, "Nah, not true." Well, I was in Tbilisi with a couple of colleagues for 3 or 4 days, and there I was by accident denounced. There's a very famous Georgian painter who was an impressionist, Lado Gudashvili, and he came back during the Civil War and when the Soviet Union started as a patriot, but he should have really stayed in France. He would be a very famous painter. I was taken to his apartment. He was deceased, but his wife was living, and she lived in this lovely 5-bedroom apartment in Tbilisi, and she asked me to sign the visitor's book. Underneath my name was the name of Bobby Kennedy, and then I signed, and she looked at the name and she said, "What's a Kakabadze doing in England?" And she suddenly said, "You must be Cyril's grandson." My grandfather was Cyril Kakabadze. And then she immediately reported me to the KGB minders around me. You should have seen the panic. To get me out of Tbilisi as quickly as possible, and this was February, was get the first plane to Moscow, get him out of Moscow. Went to Moscow, it was frozen over, snowed over, couldn't land. So I went to Leningrad. There were no planes leaving Leningrad. And so I was to be shot at midnight. And I saw the police, the army, and I saw the firing squad coming up. And I was in the lounge in Leningrad with the colleagues, my academic colleagues. I had the feeling nothing was going to happen because I knew the diplomacy to get me out and not have any problems was great. So the Russians managed to kick off 4 Finns on the only flight leaving Leningrad to Helsinki, and I managed to get to Helsinki with 20 minutes to spare. So that was my background. I was fascinated with government, fascinated with how things really happen in government and what is the governance of government. But from that sort of stimulus, I decided to do some research. And the research landed up in being Bilderberg people. The Bilderberg book that was published from the research was not about the sabotage that the Bilderbergs can do, or if you like, what they're doing secretly in the background. It was about the people who become part of the Bilderberg, and how do these very human and actually very intelligent and bright people succumb to what is a predominant influence. And that then led to a number of other governance studies right across the world. I think I've got now the biggest database in the world on boards, 41 countries, well over 20,000 organizations, including 3 governments, on really what is the boardroom oversight behavior, what is the governance of our world, where are our weaknesses, and where are we going to falter in the future or improve in the future. The regretful story is that we have gone overboard on legalities and compliance and processes and procedures, and we have not looked after the one bit of governance that's critical, which is the stewardship, the facilitation, the quiet leadership of how we guide an organization or even a whole country to greater prosperity. Instead, we look at the legalities and whether we've broken one legal protocol or not. So regretfully, our governance is reducing, but there are certain books that capture this. One is called The 5 Qs. What is your leadership intelligence? Another is How do boards really work? As well as a number of papers that have emerged. But the governance of our life, which is the Bilderbergers on the one hand, what's happening in the Ukraine on the other hand, we are following a doctrine that is not going to help us.
Well, this conference is really a forum for the transatlantic elite and for maintaining U.S. dominance over the European continent. It was founded in 1954 at a period of anxiety in Europe about the resurgence of communism, anti-Americanism, and the oldest attendee there, who's been going since 1957 and who is there this year, is Henry Kissinger. So that should tell you a lot. It's low key because the location is always kept secret. It's up to independent, scrappy journalists to find the location. And it was a Portuguese journalist, I think his name is Henrique Carvalho, who's written a book about Bilderberg, who found this year's location, which was at Pestana Palace, a very ritzy location in Lisbon. And only about 4 reporters were outside, which really tells you a lot about the Western international correspondents who actually attended this meeting. You had the editor-in-chief of The Economist. You had the chief foreign policy correspondent for finance, and these journalists have sworn to an oath of secrecy, to Chatham House rules, to keep completely off the record what took place inside and what takes place inside these meetings.
Had I been invited to a Bilderberg meeting, would I have said yes? I hesitate. And the reason I hesitate is it was clear to me what the agenda was. I didn't have such insightful detail as I have now on the 2 tensions in the world and how these 2 tensions are building up. But I didn't like the idea of old-fashioned British American capital ruling the scene without anything else. So I probably, had I been invited, would have said yes. I probably would have felt uncomfortable, and I probably would have known I would not be invited back. One of the sobering experiences when you go to big meetings, important meetings, is you cannot pretend. You cannot pretend basically you're something else to what you are, because you are put under the spotlight. People do ask you questions, and the tone of your responses and the questions that you ask indicates your philosophy. So if anybody is invited to an elitist meeting, my advice is please know yourself, because you will be discovered, and that might be a wonderful thing. But if you feel your tone is not in keeping with the meeting, at least know why you're going.